All right, let's move on to the Sixers finally being put out of their misery tonight by the Miami Heat. I made two bets tonight, both money line bets, both on the road team in a game 6. But I made those bets for very different reasons. I bet on Phoenix because I think they have a lot more talent than Dallas. I bet on Miami because they don't have as much talent, but because I could count on them to bring their very best punch in a closeout game on the road. You know, there's a lot of attention thrown towards Heat culture. It's kind of like a buzzword. I think it gets overplayed as it pertains to comparing that to the rest of the better teams in the league, right? Like, I don't think Miami has some massive culture advantage over Golden State or a massive culture advantage over like the LA Clippers or the Milwaukee Bucks or many of the other teams around the league. However, they do absolutely have a culture advantage over the middling teams in the league and the teams at the bottom. You know, especially when you see in environments like this, there's a toughness that goes into the way that they play. Eric Spoelstra has said before that the types of players that Miami targets are edgy, and they're usually guys that have had, you know, a different path to their position in the NBA currently. They usually have a chip on their shoulder. They usually weren't, you know, high-level draft picks, guys that, you know, were used to success. They're usually guys that have kind of been down in the dumps a little bit at various points in their basketball careers. And that breeds a certain level of toughness. They're an extremely, you know, when it comes to the talent that's on the roster, you can always count on a handful of things. You can count on them being in their peak physical condition. You can count on them being mentally tough. You can count on them being well coached. We've talked a lot about Miami over the course of this playoff run and the way that they have, you know, I compared them in a recent show to those viral clips that go around in the NBA of like 3 or 4 NBA players all doing the same thing at the same time, whether it's all complaining at the ref at the same time or all running down in transition at the same time, and they go viral because it looks bizarre, because it looks like almost like video game characters. That's what Miami looks like on defense and on offense. Everything they do is so disciplined, and you can count on a certain level of attention to detail from that team every single night. And it's their biggest advantage in a lot of these situations. You know, specifically when it comes to coaching and like a night like tonight. One of the things that they've been doing consistently throughout this entire playoff run, but it's obviously was deeply impactful tonight, is they do things like switch coverages. Like one possession you come down, they're in a zone. The next position you come down, they're in a man. One time you run a pick and roll, they trap it. The next time that you run a pick and roll, they're in a traditional drop. Then they randomly switch it. Do you guys understand how hard that is to do in the flow of a basketball game? Do you understand how much time and effort when it comes to coaching, how much time and effort it takes to instill those things? You know, it's funny because I coach high school basketball, and I can't tell you how many times my coaching staff and we will ask our players to run a play and they won't do it, but they're kids, you know, so you expect that to a certain extent. But even when I was in college, it was the same thing. Can't tell you how many times the coach on the sideline would make a call with grown men. When I was playing NAIA ball, like it's like we had a 29-year-old point guard and a 31-year-old shooting guard. I was one of the young guys at age 22. And it was, you know, and for the record, and for all you kids out there trying to play one day, or are playing right now in high school or in college, one of the easiest ways to solidify your spot in a rotation is to be dependable when it comes to running plays right, or being in the right spots in your defensive scheme, and always being where the coach needs you to be in whatever his system is. But Miami has that down to a T. That's why I bet on them tonight. And then we look at the other side with Philly. And I tweeted this out earlier. Is there a 4-man grouping in this playoff field that is more talented than Joel Embiid, James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, and Tobias Harris? There probably is. If we really looked hard, you could probably say like a Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, Brook Lopez is above them, right? You could say like a Steph, Clay, Jordan Poole, Draymond Green, but that's probably the end of that list. Maybe Chris Paul, Booker, Ayton, and Bridges, right? But like that Philly quartet is right there with them. But they just, 3 games in this series, 4 games, games 1, 2, and games 5 and 6, they gave a piss poor effort, which is astounding under the circumstances. In those first 2 games in Miami, yeah, Embiid's out, I get it, but they punted those games. They quit in the first quarter of game 5. The big reason why I bet on Miami tonight was because Philly quit in the first quarter of game 5 of a pivotal 2-2 playoff series. And then after the game, Joel Embiid came out and basically implied that he doesn't want to be playing. He had this long drawn out quote about how, if he's in a lose-lose situation because if he plays, he won't play well. But if he doesn't play, everyone will call him soft. Well, here's the thing, dude. You're on national TV. And game 3 and game 4 were on national TV. You had a broken face and you were recovering from a concussion in those 2 games. And we saw you sell your soul on the court on defense. And then at game 5 and 6, you just stopped. You just didn't do it. Now, okay, like maybe is it possible that there is stuff going on that puts you in a position where, as the series was progressing, things got worse? I don't know. It's hard to jump to that conclusion. All I know is that you had those same injuries in game 3 and game 4, and you didn't play hard. Anybody on the roster. James Harden took 2 shots in that second half tonight. How bizarre is that? There's a bunch of stuff going on in the area of toughness and just metal and all of those little intangible basketball qualities. There were so many things for Philly in this series that went south. And guess what? That's what happened last year. Philly had more talent than Atlanta. Philly had more talent than Miami. They lost both of those series. That's one of those things, like when we're getting into the top of the league, when we're comparing you to Kevin Durant and LeBron James and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Steph Curry, we're talking about guys that bring it every single night, especially at least in the postseason, and set a certain tone that trickles down the roster. For whatever reason, that just doesn't happen with Philly. And it's bizarre. But before we move on, I want to give some credit to Miami because, again, I described them in our last show that talked about Miami. I described them as a sponge in the desert that they squeeze every last drop out of. There's no chance in the world that Miami's going to leave points on the table, that Miami's going to leave an opportunity on the table. They will get the absolute most out of their talent. It's funny because I put in my notes, Philly's big mistake. And I put that during the game because all I could think of is who'd be a guy to have in your foxhole for a game like this is Jimmy Butler. And then as fate would have it, Jimmy Butler after the game, quote, he's talking about Embiid. Love him. I'm proud of him. I still wish I was on his team. I definitely love the Miami Heat, though. I got so much respect and love for Joel Embiid. That was their big mistake. They chose Tobias Harris instead of Jimmy Butler in that summer. And there's some conflicting intel there. Apparently, Philly might have offered him 4 years instead of 5 years or whatever it was. And there's, obviously Jimmy had an affinity for Miami and he fits in perfect to that system. So I get it. But we far too often in these situations, we underestimate the way that toughness and metal factors in to these playoff series. Just like Eric Spoelstra said after game 5. You work so hard on a scheme, you work hard on strategy, you come up with a plan, but really all of that goes out the window and it comes down to who goes out and makes the extra efforts, who goes out and is willing to do the things that other people are not willing to do on the floor. So where do we go from here if you're Philly? Well, let's start with Harden. What do you do with James Harden? Really weird game tonight. Wasn't attacking the rim, not even putting the refs in a position where they had to try to make a decision about whether or not he was fouled. 2 shot attempts in the second half. Really weird night. But I've said this before, and it's what I truly believe. You keep Harden, despite the fact that he will be overpaid the minute you put pen to paper, for 2 reasons. First of all, he's an asset. At some point down the line, you'll be able to trade him, and you'll be able to get something back in return. Whereas if you don't sign him, you get nothing. But 2, aside from tonight was weird. I think I'm not going to be as hard on Harden for tonight as I would be if he was the true leader of the team, the way he was when he was in Houston. This is Joel Embiid's team. He came out flat. Everyone else followed. James Harden, because of his physical decline, is not capable right now of hitting the Jets. He could have taken 10 shots in that second half and they still would have lost, to be clear. He's just, with his physical decline, he's not capable of it at this point in time. Remains to be seen if he'll be able to do it in the future. So I'm not going to be as hard on him. But for the most part in this postseason, I thought Harden did pretty well given his physical limitations. I thought in games 3 through 5 of this series, particularly in game 5, I thought he was the only Sixer that showed up. And obviously he was a monster in game 4. Did it with knocking down his whole impact in this postseason was mainly knocking down threes and playmaking, but that's all he's capable of right now. So to his credit, I actually, the way I look at it, if you're Philly and you're looking at if you're Daryl Morey and you're looking at this roster, I actually like a lot of things about this roster. Tyrese Maxey is really good. Guys, he's in his second season, and he had monster playoff games in this playoff run. He was a huge part of why they beat Toronto, his ability to get out and transition. He reminds me, he's not as good as Jordan Poole, doesn't have that kind of side-to-side shiftiness in the off-the-dribble jump shooting, but he's a very good shooter already, and he has that Jordan Poole straight-line drive threat that can be so devastating in the NBA, especially in a spread floor. I love Tyrese Maxey's game. Tobias Harris, he's overpaid, sure, but he's a very good basketball player, and for him to be your third or fourth best player as a guy who can guard the other team's best wing, exploit mismatches, spot up off the ball, attack closeouts, score in transition, all the things that he can do, that's a huge weapon to have on your roster. Joel Embiid, we're going to talk about him in a minute. Joel Embiid's great, And then James Harden is that adult in the room on the perimeter. I talked a lot about this in the Boston series after last night, right? Boston's biggest weakness right now is they don't have a player that understands the flow of a basketball game, that understands when things are getting off the rails offensively and when to rein them in. Just an adult with the basketball. Like a traditional point guard type of concept. They don't have that guy in Boston. That's a value there. And one last thing on the Harden thing, he's 32. Is it going to happen? I don't know. Probably not. But there is a chance too, and this is another reason why you extend him, there's a chance that this was the season where Harden got humbled in some ways. He probably realized in this playoff run that he tried to tap into some things that weren't there anymore. And he may go into this offseason with a renewed motivation to try to improve his physical conditioning. We're going to learn a lot about James Harden with the way he comes into training camp next season. Last note on Philly, I think they have to fire Doc Rivers. He had some moments in this postseason, to be clear. I thought he outcoached Nick Nurse in the first round. But here's the thing. The toughness element, if it's not going to come from a player, it has to come from your coach. Look at the Celtics. The Celtics had issues with toughness consistently over the previous few years. Ime Udoka came in and completely changed that. Younger, more recently in the league, a guy who brings a ton of toughness when he was a player, and he inflicted that on his players in his locker room. What I would do is I'd fire Doc Rivers and I'd find a guy like Ime Udoka. I have to do some research to find some specific examples, but I'd look for someone that has a toughness type of identity that can inflict that on this group, because that's what this group needs. And before we move on entirely, I have one last note. On the Danny Green injury, I have no idea if Joel Embiid flopped into his leg. I have my suspicions, but I'm not going to jump to that conclusion. I'm really, really bummed out for Danny Green. He's not on a guaranteed contract next year. Didn't look good. We don't know the MRI results yet, but we can all be pretty sure that's bad. And he probably wouldn't be able to finish rehab until he's 36 years old. So I don't know if we're going to see him play NBA basketball again, and that really bums me out. I'm not going to comment on that play. But what I am going to do is take this opportunity to once again tell you guys that this flopping shit has to be taken out of the league. It is terrible for the league in terms of the health of the game of basketball. It's terrible for the television product. Joel Embiid became a freaking caricature of himself tonight. He was falling on almost every single play. There was a play where he was running back on defense in transition and tripped over himself and fell. It's like, I've never seen anything like it. It's bad. It's bad for the health of the game. It's bad for the television product. And most importantly, it's not safe. Again, I'm not referencing that play. I'm just saying, especially as a big human being, every time you willingly and purposefully fall on the floor in traffic, you put everyone else around you at risk. You put their legs at risk. You put their ankles at risk. You put their knees at risk. And you willingly make that decision. And this is where I have to go at the NBA. Because this has been a problem for the better part of a decade now. And they let this happen. Go turn on a game from like 2002. Go turn on a game from like 1992. Tell me how much flopping you see. This is a newish problem in the last decade or so. And it's 1,000% because it gets rewarded. I shared out a tweet today. You could see it on my feed. Joel Embiid drawing a foul on PJ Tucker on a pull-up jump shot at the free throw line where he literally does not get touched and kicks both of his legs in the air like he does on every single shot attempt and flails and screams and gets a foul call. It worked. Why would he stop? What incentive is there for Joel Embiid to stop flopping when it works? And it's a significant chunk of his offense. The irony is, averaged 12 free throw attempts in the regular season, it's down to 9 in the postseason. Dropped from 28 points a game, or 30 points a game in the 31 points a game in the regular season, down to 24 points per game in the postseason. When you rely on getting to the foul line, and it still works to a certain extent, but it works less. It's no surprise that it stops functioning for you. Look at the guys at the top of the league. LeBron James is not dependent on getting to the foul line. Steph Curry is not dependent on getting to the foul line. Jokic is not dependent on getting to the foul line. Neither is Giannis. None of those guys are serial floppers. They rely on putting the ball in the damn basket. And it's bad for Embiid in his own development. It's bad for the health of the league. And if he's not responsible for hurting Danny Green today, he's going to be responsible for hurting someone in the future. Because a giant 270-pound human falling all over the place in traffic like he did a dozen times tonight, everyone's planted. Everyone's standing around him. It's dangerous. And it's embarrassing, objectively unlikable, and it's terrible for the game of basketball. And I'm just ready for it to be over. I'm sick of it. And I feel really bad for Danny Green. I hope that he'll be okay.